welcome to the second introduction to intercultural communication and managing how we communicate with those from different cultural backgrounds and settings. Last time what we did was we looked at the idea of identity, you know, and contrasted this sort of traditional idea of identity, which is that, you know, there's an us that is you know, sort of durable and permanent. And when people say, "Who are you?" maybe you answer with a range of nouns that cover your gender or nationality or, you know, profession and so on. And I suggested that rather than seeing things in that way, it's quite useful to take a more sort of communicative understanding of identity. And in, you know, linguistics and psychology and so on, a more current way that identity is looked at as is looking at us identifying particular or occupying particular positions. And, you know, I showed this picture. You can see you've got a pilot and a soldier and an architect and doctors and so on. And we were saying that, you know, these positions, we occupy many of those. I am both a son and a father, for instance. So we occupy many of these identity positions, and what that means is that there's a sort of personal element, your you know, individual backstory, preferences, personality, that kind of thing. There's a collective element, and there's a sort of embodiment, so a set of things that go with it. So we were looking at these pictures and identifying the professions of the different people based on things like stethoscopes. You know, doctors wear stethoscopes, accountants don't, and so on. And what we talked about a little bit was in terms of the collective social element, some of that is knowledge. You know, if you're a doctor, you have a different body of knowledge to if you're an architect, for instance, different frames of reference, different technical understanding. But another thing that you have is you have different ways of communicating. So when we're holding different identity positions, particularly professionally, we communicate differently. A barrister in a courtroom has an entirely different sort of repertoire of ways of communicating compared to, say, a sales assistant in a clothes shop. You know, just very different set of habits. So that, you know, is a discourse approach, thinking about language use in order to achieve social goals. And I talked a little bit about how the way that belonging to a group is signaled and claimed by communicating in the manner of that group. So we talked about Mihai Bakhtin and this idea of ventriloquation, of taking on the language of the members of a group in order to become a member of that group yourself. And we do this constantly, but because we do it constantly and, you know, sort of broadly unconsciously, because we learn it through socialization, it's the kind of thing that we don't notice. So what we're going to do in today's short session is we're going to look at how this works. So just take this example. So this comes from a website called Very British Problems, which is very funny. And basically it takes, you know, what British people say. If you're British and you read this, you probably notice that you say these things yourself. If you're not British but you live in Britain, you may well have heard these things said quite often. And then the middle column is what this means for the British. You know, so for instance, "that's not bad" means that's good. You know, "that's quite good" means that's a bit disappointing. Yeah. And then there's a more sort of literal understanding of what these terms mean. You know, so what this means to people not within this discourse system, this you know, agreed use of certain terms to have certain meanings. You know, and you would think "not bad" would be better than would be worse, sorry, than "quite good," whereas to the British, actually, it's the other way around. You know, So we, in our everyday life, we have these ways of communicating where we just assume everybody understands the same thing, whereas in fact, that isn't the case. And one of the reasons that I've really encouraged you to think about identity positions in this way is to link to the idea of performance. So if you think of identity in this way as about, who you are, when you go into different situations, it's quite easy to feel uncomfortable about change and difference. Whereas if you just note that there are different identity positions and they involve different kinds of knowledge and communication and behavior in different places and settings and so on, then it's much easier to be quite adaptable. And intercultural communication requires you to be adaptable. You'll sit in meetings and think, we don't do it like that. I'm not used to it being done like that. I was surprised that happened and so on. If you're in a mindset of thinking, oh, they perform it in this way here, they do it differently here, then you can adapt and you'll feel much less uncomfortable and things will go much better. If on the other hand, you're in this kind of quite set mindset of saying, well, this is how it should be, that's where people find intercultural encounters much more difficult and sort of generate emotion and that sort of thing. So what we're going to do in this session, what I'd like to do is to sort of break this down. Think about how it is that you came to say that's not bad and mean that's pretty good, even though the meaning and what you actually say they don't really stack up. So Ron Scollin is a very, very famous linguist. He and his wife, Susan Wong Scollin, created this idea of a discourse system. So a system is used to show that, or to signal that this is how we live. This is how this works in our everyday life. And so the discourse system is our system of communication from the perspective of a certain identity position. So they break this down into 4 elements: ways of thinking, ways of treating other people, ways of communicating, ways of learning. And we have multiple systems, each of us. So just as we have multiple identity positions, each one of those has discourse systems associated with it, and they differ, So when you're, if there's a barrister, and when that barrister, to take the earlier example, is in the courtroom, they need to use one particular discourse system for that aspect of their lives. If later on they go home and they have a family barbecue, if they address the family barbecue the same way they address the jury, that would be quite strange. That would lead to a foreshortened family barbecue and probably no repeat performance. So we're very used to being kind of flexible and navigating different ways of communicating. And we're also used to communicating across different boundaries. And if we just extend that into our commercial links, in terms of this course with Chinese Mandarin speaking counterparts, then that's kind of building on existing strengths that we already have. So, as I say, you've got a whole range of discourse systems that belong to discourse communities or associated identity positions that you have. For the next 5 minutes or so, I'm going to run through an example, right? I'm going to run through a personal example. And what I want you to do is to think of a discourse community or an identity position that you hold that's associated with your free time. Right? So what do you enjoy doing Saturday and Sunday? Do you watch football? Do you play music? Do you knit? Do you, I don't know, what is a lifestyle choice that you associate with, and that you really enjoy. And what we're going to do is we're just going to run through. So how do these 4 elements of a discourse system work from the perspective of a certain lifestyle, sort of choice or identity position? I'm going to do one that's true for me. So I'm going to talk about being a cricket fan, because cricket is a good example of a very strange set of communicative norms. And the reason and what I want you to do is, as I kind of say, well, this is how it is if you're, in cricket, I'd like you to think about, well, how is this in caravanning or saxophone playing, or whatever your particular lifestyle choice is, so that you're kind of getting a sense of how this works. And of course, within your lifestyle choice, there will be a whole range of ways that people organize themselves. So, you know, you've got your in-group of your choice, like cricket fans, and that's compared to other kinds of social, you know, activity and lifestyle choice. But even within your in-group, that breaks down further. So for instance, here, this was from a Cricket World Cup. You can see you've got a New Zealand, a South African, and an Indian cricket fan. And they've got quite different ways of, you know, discourse systems and ways of representing themselves in the world. So for instance, the New Zealander is very focused on their rivalry with Australia. You know, and what makes you a New Zealand cricket fan is this kind of other position from Australian cricket fan. Then you've got the South African, and one of the things that makes the South African cricket fan a South African cricket fan is he doesn't talk about the South African cricket team, he talks about the Proteas, which is their nickname. For the Indian cricket fan, one of the things is about belonging. It's about, you know, it's a you know, a core reference point for being Indian. When they won the World Cup in the mid-1990s, one of the things that came out of it was that 1 billion people were rooting for, you know, the Indian cricket team, and there's a, you know, this kind of reference point to the nation sharing this you know, obsession with cricket, which, for instance, in the UK, you know, that doesn't hold. It's not, you know, very few people are interested in cricket in England compared to, say, football, for instance. So hopefully you've got your lifestyle choice. Within that lifestyle choice, there should be, you know, things that you notice make you a particular kind of person within that. So maybe you like running. Are you, you know, 5K park runner? Are you, you know, jog on my own and I'm not involved? Do you run longer races? Can you say how long it takes you in minutes to run 10K? You know, all of this, you know, breaks up your group into sort of subgroups. Okay, so let's think about this. So I'm going to talk about cricket. I want you to compare what I say about this strange thing called cricket with what appears perfectly normal to you in terms of your own, you know, lifestyle choice and what you're interested in. So the idea is people hold common ideological positions. That means have beliefs about how to live and how to do the thing that you're doing. And these beliefs about how to do this thing come into life in the world through certain kinds of behaviors, right? There are certain behaviors that are appropriate because they reflect certain kind of beliefs and values within that, you know, within that area. So for instance, in cricket, here's a picture. The two batsmen between overs, they walk together and they bump gloves, you know? They only do this between overs on a cricket pitch, right? If these two guys went to the pub and one of them bought 2 pints of beer and came and sat down, they wouldn't bump fists to celebrate that. Or if they went to the supermarket, they wouldn't bump fists at the end of each aisle as they were shopping. That would be really weird. So one of the things about a discourse system is some things become normal in one setting, where in another setting they would be really quite odd. Then you've got decision-making norms, you know, things about your lifestyle choice that you know, definitely organize your thinking. So in cricket, before the match, the captains have to decide who wants to bat first or bowl first. And what, you know, one of the things that you do is you look at the pitch, but then you stop and you look up and you look at the sky to see what the atmospheric conditions are, because that will affect the game. It may well be that in knitting, say, if your choice is knitting, then the kind of wool is a sort of decision criterion that leads to certain kinds of norms. Maybe you knit certain patterns with a certain kind of wool and other patterns with another kind of wool. You know, that you know, is an important discipline in your thinking when you you know, do this activity. And then values are really important. what's a good version of thing, what's a bad version of thing. In cricket, people can play for 5 days and at the end it's a draw, something that in other cultures seems just really bizarre. But, you know, within that, you can have a good draw and a bad draw, you know, and there are criteria for why that is. So sort of a key element of a discourse system is there are ways of thinking about this activity that are, you know, understood as that's the right thing to do, that's normal, that's how we do it. And then there are other ways of thinking that apply elsewhere but don't apply, you know, to this activity. Then there's what are called face relationships. So face relationships are the accepted way to treat each other, you know, to forward, you know, happy and successful social interaction going forward. So for instance, in-group and out-group relations. So I've got 2 pictures here. In the top one, members of the Australian cricket team are hugging each other, and you are allowed to hug each other in cricket, not at the moment, obviously, because of the COVID-19. You don't hug the other team, you shake hands with the other team. Shake hands with the other team, out group, hug your own team, in group. In different sports, that works differently. You'll find that with the activity that you've chosen, that is part of your life, that there are ways that you communicate with and behave with people who are also part of what you do. If you meet other people at the park run 9:30 on a Saturday morning, there are ways you talk to the other people and interact with the other people on the park run that you don't then do with other people who happen to be in the park but aren't doing the park run or that kind of thing. And there are ways that you signal respect, ways that you understand the complementarity of the roles. You know, if you're members of a knitting circle, does your knitting circle, you know, include, you know, different ways in which, you know, one of you brings one thing, other people bring other things to ensure that things go nicely? Do you go to different people's houses in different weeks? I don't know. In cricket, you know, people in one position will do things for people in the other position. So people at mid-on shine the ball for the bowler and that kind of thing. So then there's ways of communicating specifically that relate to the group that you belong to. So for instance, here in this picture, there's a very, very strange situation, which is that the Australian bowler has just bowled at the English batsman. The English batsman may or may not be out, right? So physically, in reality, in the world, something has happened and there are criteria about whether this person is out or in. But none of that will matter unless they turn to the umpire, which is what they're all doing now, that's why their hands are in the air, and ask the umpire whether the person is out. So there's a sort of strange social sort of additional layer of interaction that's required. You have to say, how's that, to the umpire, and the umpire then has to make a decision. If nobody talks to the umpire, then by default, this person can't be out. It's kind of strange. But if you think, what are the norms of interaction in your group? And what shared frames of reference? What's the technical vocabulary of your group? So in cricket, somebody could say, can you go square? And you know what to do. But in any other situation, if somebody says, can you go square? It doesn't make sense, it doesn't have meaning. So for your, you know, for your group, if you're in a knitting circle, you know what a cross stitch is and you know what a drop stitch is and so on, that other people, well, they don't know, you know. If you're into running, you know, you may well decide, you know, have long conversations about Asics as opposed to Brooks, and have very strong views about which is the better running shoe and so on. So how does that work? Think about your, you know, your frames of reference, your technical language for your lifestyle choice. And then the last part is to think about, so how did you learn? How did you learn all of this system? As I said last week when we looked at the Arsenal supporters, a lot of learning is through participation and observation of others. It's called peripheral learning, to become part of a community of practice. And, you know, obviously to be a, you know, to learn about cricket, you watch cricket and you listen and you take part in cricket matches and so on. And also because it's a sport that's coaching, you can see here that coach is teaching this young women how to play what's called a forward defensive, which is, part of the technical skill or set of cricket. And, for your social activity, whatever it is, you learned in particular ways. Some of it you were taught, some of it you observed, some of which you just chose because you liked it. You like being involved with it. You like how you look when you're doing it. Think about the clothing that you've bought associated with your chosen activity. So, there's this sort of social learning aspect to a discourse system. So if we come back to intercultural communication particularly, you can see that the reason that we're really successful at communicating with people who are in our in-group is we share this sort of perspective of how to do things, how to interact with each other, how to communicate about the thing, and how to learn this complex set of reference points and this sort of world encaptured in this successful communication. All of that goes beyond basic vocabulary. It's one thing to learn another language. So, we can study our Mandarin, and, we can learn our terms like, Hengashing Renshadaja. You can open your welcome, saying how happy you are to meet other people and so on. But that's only, that vocabulary, these phrases, they're only one part of a wider understanding of who to address in what way, what face relationships you're going to create, and so on. So, in the first session, I was talking about, thinking about opera and a sort of Italian tradition and a Chinese tradition. So you have the Peking opera on the right hand side. You think about what we've been talking about, your lifestyle choice, and you can see how it applies to, say, La Traviata and the tradition that comes out of, and Journey to the West and the tradition that comes out of. And it, there's a lot to it. Much of it will be similar. So last time we talked about handshakes, right? And handshakes will be used much the same. Handshakes will enable proximity, have a designated period of physical touching, will enable eye contact, and eye contact will signal, will manage positive opening of face relationships and that kind of thing. And within two slightly different discourse systems, the handshake will also have features, certain sort of behaviors that will differ. So as we said, on the left, the boss on the left is showing power through using both hands. And on the right, the boss in the right-hand picture is showing power through using one hand, and the other person, the subordinate, is committing both their hands. Okay? So just a different way of doing things. If you're aware of this, you'll know that some people, you might not want to put both hands up, and other people, you might not want to use both your hands. You might want to, or at least be aware of it and then kind of work it out in the moment. And, you find this kind of across a whole host of business contexts in, using your Mandarin in a commercial setting. So, meetings, there will be meetings. You will be in meetings, there'll be in meetings. There's a wonderful study, I recommend it, by Spencer Oti and Xing, about two business meetings that took place in the UK between teams of UK-based and Chinese engineers. And one business meeting went really well and the other went really badly. And what they did was they interviewed the parties and they kind of worked out why it was that one went well and one went badly. And actually, a lot of it was to do with how to hold a meeting, how to communicate, how that communication created face sensitivities, face relationships that served each other. So ironically, the more successful meeting, you can have a look, you'll find it on the Moodle site, the more successful meeting was successful because it was delayed. And in that delay, the Chinese delegation and the British, representatives from the British company, they just sat there and they talked to each other without an agenda for about 25 minutes. And they got to know each other. And from a Chinese perspective, they felt that they were developing, the basis for trust and connection and understanding. Whereas the unsuccessful meeting started on time, so they did that very, sort of standard British thing of, okay, let's do the welcome, let's start, second item on the agenda, and they got straight into it. And the Chinese delegation said that they felt disrespected. They didn't feel like time was taken to, to get to know each other, to spend to invest in who they were as people, that kind of idea. And you'll see that, when you're in China, the seating arrangements matter in a way that they tend to matter a bit less in a UK-based, setting. And if you're sitting in the right place, then things will go better. If you're not, so just awareness of these things. One thing that I've learned over time is when I'm in China, I just never sit down until somebody Chinese tells me which seat I should sit in. And I really appreciate that, because then I don't make a mistake. So I just stand there like a lost foreigner for a little bit. And the people say, oh, yes, you come and sit here. And then I look at the room like this picture, and things work. And in some ways, it's the little things that can have a big effect. So, we did or have a contract with a Chinese bank and its operations in the UK, and working with staff there on how they accomplish their teamwork successfully. There are some sort of behaviors in meetings that actually generated a lot of difficulty. So one of the things you can see in this picture on the right-hand side is that in a UK-based meeting, there is a general norm. If you think about, sort of ideological position, as in sort of how to live in the world and sort of norms, there's a norm of pretending to pay attention. It's kind of polite, or at least politeness is defined by a behavior that looks like paying attention. You should pay attention. Whereas I've been in quite a few meetings in China, and the politeness is signaled by being present and showing respect by giving up the time. But if you're not directly involved, there isn't this same expectation that you should be paying attention, or that you should be showing that you're paying attention, actually, more accurately. And so people sit and they're on their phone, they're working, they're doing their emails and that kind of thing. You can see in this picture, the person is sorting through her wallet from the looks of it. And the conversation is going on perfectly happily with her not involved in that part. Whereas working in this, with this contract, working with teams, something that really exercised the London-based staff was that they would be in meetings and people would be on their phone. And they just found that very difficult. And it actually affected the performance of teams that they were in. So a key thing in successful intercultural communication is a willingness to know that people who are within a different way of doing things are going to do it differently. They're going to do, particular behaviors, and the meaning of that behavior to them is going to be different to the meaning of that behavior to you. So you should be willing to give up your own meaning and entertain the idea that there's another meaning, and that, you should make your decisions about how things are going based on knowing that, the meaning of that behavior is ambiguous. If you do that, then, and if you sit there and think it's just a different discourse system, loads of our features of discourse system are exactly the same, because after all, we're all bankers, or we're all lawyers, or whatever it is. But some bits of our discourse system differ. This is one of the things I can anticipate. And on this course, we'll talk about a whole set of things you can anticipate. This is one of those things. Oh, I've heard about this. Here in Beijing, people tend to do it that way. Here in London, people tend to do it this way. If you can bring a sort of equanimity to that, if you can just divorce it from right and wrong and turn it more into, appropriate here and done differently there, then you'll get kind of freedom. You won't get emotional. You'll be able to stay calm, to stay with the meeting, and to achieve the outcomes that you need by making good choices about how to communicate. And that's really at the core of what intercultural communication is.